So let's talk a little bit about compassion and empathy. So we've discussed compassion a bit. Empathy, it's our natural ability to understand other people's feelings and share in their experience. So we did have compassion from the Latin, to suffer with. So they're very related, to suffer with. Again, you're sharing, understand someone's experience and share in the experience. That's the difference in some ways of empathy gets in there with it as well. It's got a couple key components: an emotional response to someone's feelings, and then a cognitive understanding of his or her situation. So what happens with pity and sympathy, which keep the person a victim, there's distance. Pity and sympathy, not so healthy, is you hear somebody say something unfortunate, and there is a little bit in you of like, wow, that's horrible. I'm sorry. You may even say to someone, okay, but I don't want to get in the hole with you. I'm going to keep you over there. You can feel that from people too. So there's a different thing of that, you say my mother died and somebody says, I'm so sorry to hear that, as opposed to, oh, I'm so sorry, and I don't really want to get my hands dirty. That would be more in the pity and sympathy thing, which tend to drain people. Doesn't really help people. It's not a support for people, but it's more like, I am sorry that your mother died and I'm here for you. Do you need anything? Can I help you with something? I'm going to come by your house and deliver soup once a week. You don't even need to talk to me. So somebody says they're lonely doesn't mean you have to be lonely at the same time. But what I'm going to do is, if you say I'm lonely, and students will meet with me, I suffer from this, I'm lonely. So I'm going to reach into my experience of being lonely. I've been lonely. I'm going to reach back into that experience and meet them there. I'm looking at my pain. So I'm not running. Sympathy and pity is like, I don't want to go in there. So I'm sorry, but it's on superficial level. I'm sorry, but I don't really want to go in there. I can't look at that. I can't look at it with you. So I'm separate from it. So if somebody says they're lonely, I want to call up my lonely experience. It doesn't mean I'm lonely at that moment, but I will remember what that was like and feel it, the discomfort of it, and then I'll meet them there. Wow, that is really hard. I know that's hard. So sorry you're going through that. You know the feeling. You can feel it. There's a genuine feeling when somebody's being superficial about it and they're in a hurry and they really don't want to deal with it versus they're in the trench with you. The other thing that comes up when somebody dies and your friend tells you so-and-so died or what, somebody very close to them, it's awkward for us. We have different relationships with death, so we feel uncomfortable. Oh, I don't know what to say. This is painful. This is uncomfortable is what comes up. But we don't say that. We somehow feel it's not okay to say that. I also find it interesting. I meet with a lot of students. Sometimes they sit down and they start crying. Some major things coming up for them, teachings, and they really want to talk about it. So they start crying, and what's the first thing they say when they cry? Sorry. I'm sorry. Why are you sorry? Why are they sorry? Why do you have to say I'm sorry? Okay? Because other people get uncomfortable that you cry. Like that's been our culture. So you cry and other people are uncomfortable. You don't need to say you're sorry if you're crying with me. There's nothing wrong with crying, basically. But this is how we're conditioned. So automatically, I'm sorry, I love that I don't love when His Holiness cries, but sometimes he cries in teachings. He doesn't say he's sorry. The fact that a man can publicly cry, it's something. Our last president used to do that. I found it so moving that he could express himself like that and give an example for little boys and other men that it's okay to do that. You're one of the more powerful people on the planet, and you can cry. You can show that side of yourself, more vulnerable aspect of yourself. What's wrong with that? We're all human, very powerful. So I find just the conditioning we have around that. So I know when my sister's first husband died, shockingly, everybody was in shock, and it was horrible, the whole thing, what happened. And then he had an art opening like 2 days after he died, and she wasn't able to reach everybody. So some people turned up and found out the thing outside the art opening that he had died. And then eventually people came to see her at the house. And people get uncomfortable with death. So they say weird things, and sometimes they say really inappropriate things. And I know when my mom died, and people come from different traditions, Judeo-Christian traditions, or Muslim traditions, or Sufi, or Hindu traditions, Buddhist traditions, they're all different. But people came to our house from some of the more traditional traditions, we might say, and, she's in a better place now, they'd say. We have this phrase, and my brother would turn to me and he'd say, how do they know? Or, like it just doesn't, it sounds kind of, what is that? What are you saying? I'd rather not say anything, personally, but people say these things. My sister said one of the most honest responses she got from someone who turned up at her house after her husband died, is this woman said to her, a friend, I'm so sorry, I don't know what to say. She said to her, because she didn't know what to say. What do you say in the face of tragic death, right? So my sister said that she could handle. She said the rest of it was just blah, blah, blah. People just filling the space because they felt uncomfortable. So sometimes somebody dies. I acknowledge I'm uncomfortable. Death is often quite uncomfortable. It always seems to come as a surprise, even when somebody's old and dying of cancer. When you know that and then when you actually hear that it happened, that there's still this, it is a natural part of life. So just trying to look at, understand that I feel uncomfortable. It's okay. It's okay. It's tragic never to think that you're going to see that person again. That's hard for us. That loss is hard. And it makes me uncomfortable at times. I'm not beyond that. I can handle it in better ways at times, but sometimes it's really hard. So I want to come from an authentic place to the other person about their loss. Can I try as best as possible to come from an authentic place for this person? And I might say, I don't know what to say right now. I might just give them a hug. If they want to cry with them, hold their hand. So just see if you can get into a space and you practice it in real life. You practice. So eventually it gets easier. It does get easier. I'm okay with silence. I'm okay sometimes just sitting in the room with the family. They're grieving, and I don't need to say anything sometimes. But I'm there. I'm very present. I'm there. I might even be watching around the room, so then the coffee urn looks like it's finishing, so maybe I get up and maybe I'll help. But you don't want to busy too much. People busy. All of a sudden, they need to be, and they're over cleaning. It's like, can you just sit? Like, I know at one point, my sister, when my mom died and people were 1,000, finally she's just like, just leave it. It's okay. You don't need to clean every cup. Just leave it. So just think about your own experiences. Again, you got an emotional response to somebody else's experience, and then you're going to have a cognitive feeling about what they're going through. I remember that feeling. Yeah, I know what that's like. Empathy. Let me talk more about empathy. The emotional response may take the form of a resonance in which you experience an emotion similar to the other person's. You're feeling with, very similar to compassion, you're feeling with. Or it could be a feeling for the other, a sense of sorrow for their misfortune as well. So I'm not actually feeling with them, but that sucks. That's awful. Like that. And there's a bit, and Jimpa talks about this in his book, some meaning to be able to feel with, again, compassion to suffer with, empathy to feel with somebody. Slightly different, okay? So let me go into, I wanted to talk about Pema Chodron, and there's some other things about Pema Chodron. This is from her book, The Places That Scare You. Some of you have read this book, The Places That Scare You. I highly recommend this book. Came out several years ago. She has great titles for her books. You know, some early books, Start Where You Are, and When Things Fall Apart. These are great books for Western Buddhists. But think about the places that scare you. So we don't want to go there, okay? You have to face the pain at some point. You have to analyze your fear as well. What's underneath the fear? So it's a Lojong book about mind training. Lojong, lo, mind, jong, training the mind. So she talks about developing bodhicitta and things, and she talks about, this is Pema Chodron, when we practice generating compassion, we can expect to experience our fear of pain. Our fear of pain. So compassion practice is daring, she says. And so when you think about compassion, you don't always think about your pain. You think about, I want to relieve somebody else from suffering. But to suffer with, I have to be with them in the trench. So that means I'm going to be accessing some discomfort, which is about pain. Okay? So it's daring to do it. It involves learning to relax and allow ourselves to move gently towards what scares us. In cultivating compassion, we draw from the wholeness of our experience, our suffering, our empathy, our feeling with, okay, as well as our cruelty and our terror. It has to be this way. Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. Okay, this is the key part. That's about pity and sympathy, the healer and the wounded. You know, I'm here to help you, and something's wrong with you. Okay, that's pity and sympathy, okay? Compassion is a relationship between equals, she says. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. Our shared humanity. I don't really like the word darkness because it can be a little racist, but basically talking about only when we know our own mental afflictions and confusion and pain can I really acknowledge somebody else's and walk in there with them. And when it's superficial. When people are trying to console you and they don't really want to be there and they're like dying to get out of the room. And when other people are just happy, they can just be there, show up. Again, compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. Shared humanity. This is a theme that's coming up more and more with a lot of great thinkers on the planet right now. Shared humanity. Enough of the 70s or 80s of this independent, establishing our own thing, even maybe coming from the 60s, you might say. But now it's much more that this interconnectedness, we're all in it together, of what the Karmapa was saying. So one of the things I also want to quote are a few of my current heroes. We have different heroes at different times on the planet. I have mentioned these in other courses. So I picked up last year Brian Stevenson. He's a book called Just Mercy. Just Mercy. I highly recommend this book. He's an attorney in Alabama. He represents poor people. He represents some of whom were sentenced to death. They're on death row. Some are sentenced to life without parole. Some of them were children with life sentences without parole. Can you imagine? So he now represented in front of the Supreme Court. So it is unconstitutional for a child to be sentenced to life without parole because of him. And so he writes a book, Just Mercy, is about the history of his life when he started to found the Equal Justice Initiative and helping these poor people. Because these people, most of them a lot of them, I'll put it this way, ended up on death row. A lot of them ended up with life sentences, and they're innocent, but they're poor, so they didn't have good representation. It's criminal in this country what goes on for poor people. Healthcare, abuses. It's unbelievable. The lack of everything, lack of all the services to some degree, unless you know how to work the system well. So Just Mercy, he comes to a place in his book, and it's the same as somebody named Cory Booker. Cory Booker's the junior senator from New Jersey, was the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, an impoverished city south of New York. And he talked about his work in Newark of trying to help these people take back their communities from drugs and violence. He lived in some of the buildings with them for years, these apartment buildings, and the community organizers. And like this, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, another one, third one, talked about, after apartheid, the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, and how the person that was tortured could face the abuser, the torturer, okay, tell their story, name their pain, and have a path of either choosing to forgive or choosing to go off in anger and hostility. Okay, but a brilliant thing that they chose to do with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to try to get South Africa established, to try to get it over the unbelievable pain of apartheid, right? So all three of them, Brian Stevenson, Cory Booker, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, there's many others as well, is Pema Chodron talks about it here, the shared humanity. They all talk about shared humanity, but they all talk about how in the face of the utter pain, okay, of the people they were trying to support, all of them quite fractured, like that, of how they gave up at one point. They realized their work was like putting a Band-Aid on a hemorrhage. Those are my words, putting a Band-Aid on a hemorrhage. You come to a place where you get so frustrated, you're so alone, exhausted, okay, exhausted. And Brian Stevenson, technically, in his exhaustion, hung up the phone from a death row guy that was about to be executed, that was innocent, and there was nothing Brian Stevenson could do to get the guy off. I mean, all these other people, but it had exhausted, and he had too few attorneys, too many cases, too few resources. And he hangs up the phone and he breaks down crying, and he gives up in his mind. He's like, I'm done. I can't do this. It's too much. Too much. We've all been to these spaces. It's futile, you think. I can't do anymore. It's just too much. I quit. So in his quitting, in the insight that came just from this night in his office, late night in the office, and he has this insight, we're all broken. We're all broken. Okay, this is samsara. Okay, we have Buddha nature, but we're not Buddhas yet. So Tibetan Buddhism says the same thing. As long as you are a human being, the nature of your existence is it's flawed. You are flawed. Okay, but I'm not laying a trip on you. But it's when you acknowledge your brokenness, and Brian Stevenson talks about the only way to get past it and to get over it was to go through it, was to face it. You know, instead of pretending that he could do this and he was invincible and he was this and he was going to get all these people off, and you have these dreams, is I have to acknowledge I'm just like these people. We're all the same. We're all the same. We want to be happy. We don't want to suffer. It was very significant. All these books, so similar. And they all, you know, it's interesting. You pick up a book and then you get other mirrors of it that come through. And they're all doing still incredible work. He decided not to quit. But it was in his acknowledging the pain and laying there on the floor. He wasn't really on the floor, but I'm saying we've all made mistakes. And you fall flat on your face. What do you want to do in that instant? It's a powerful instant in your life. So use it. You're laying there on the floor and you go, God, I screwed up. And you may feel humiliation if people witness it. You may feel utter desperation and hopelessness. I can't do anymore. I'm done. You may be sobbing uncontrollably. Just the mind, I can't focus on anything. I have nothing in my mind right now of goodness. I'm useless, right? Those moments, very powerful, because everybody feels that on the planet at some point. No different than them. So the choice, you pick yourself back up. You're going to lay there forever? No. Pick yourself back up. Glean the messages. Understand the messages that are coming. What happened? Please analyze. Tibetan Buddhism says, please investigate thoroughly. Check up. What did I do? What went on? But you're going to do it in a balanced way. No, I'm not unworthy. I just made a mistake. That's okay. Why? Because I'm a human being. I'm okay with that. I make many mistakes as a nun. I make many mistakes as a teacher, as a nun, somebody running a center. Oh my goodness. So if I was just crippled and said, I'm done here, I've got a lot more goodness I can do. I totally believe that. I'm not perfect. I'm not great. But, I picked myself back up. What happened? Okay. Well, I did screw up there. But I also have to be wary because these people didn't really understand what was happening. So maybe I should give them more information in the future. Maybe I should also watch my speech if it wasn't very skillful, or whatever goes on, And then I decide I'm going to proceed forward. 2 steps forward. You mess up again, 1 step back. 1 step back, sometimes I get perspective when I step back. Okay, now I understand what's going on. Now I see. Now I understand my limitations more. Okay, now I'm going to go forward. A little bit of wisdom, then you move forward with that, but you keep going forward. So it's so significant, the shared humanity, to understand our brokenness. There's nothing wrong with that. But somehow in the United States, no, we should be invincible and perfect. And then you see people that get the attention on the news, on the internet, blah, 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 and you see these things, right? So then you think, I should be more like that. Or I don't want to be like that, but I should be more power. This is power. This is power. If you're powerful, then you're happy. Really? Well, there's a guy on the planet now who seems to be pretty powerful. I don't think he's very happy. Really? So check. Okay? But the people I know, and I just mentioned those 3 people, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Cory Booker, Brian Stevenson, they're right down there with people, right in their face, hanging out with these people. No problem about that. I find them extremely powerful people. So it's not about power. It's about getting real with yourself, waking up for your mind, what is going on in my mind, and trying to slowly fix the stuff I'm not exactly thrilled with. And what that means is dismantling delusion. And it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. It's a process. I need to figure out what are my main delusions, and I'm going to go after those first. How do I go after them? Start meditating, start understanding the nature of your mind, looking at your mind, and then learning the antidotes. We talked about some last night regarding in general delusions and with attachment. Like that. You have to do some of the work. It takes effort. This is a process. Okay. A little bit more compassion. Recognizing the light and dark in our shared humanity. Again, the word shared humanity. We commit to practicing loving kindness with ourselves and others in the face of suffering. Okay, with ourselves and others. Okay, you don't leave yourself out of the equation. Please don't. Okay, you're part of it. And otherwise, if you're not practicing compassion with yourself, then trying to do it with someone else is superficial. Just stays at the surface level. Okay, so we're in the equation. Empathy. The most powerful tool of compassion. Empathy is an emotional skill that allows us to respond to others in a meaningful, caring way. Empathy is the ability to understand what someone is experiencing and to reflect back that understanding. Okay? Again, the ability to understand what somebody's experiencing and reflect back the understanding. Pity and sympathy, I'm so sorry. But I don't really want to understand what's going on because it's painful. And I'm not going to reflect that back to you. I'm not coming from that place. Separate, detached, distanced. Okay? But otherwise, your mother died. I may not, it doesn't mean that your mother had to die, but I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. And you're just imagining how painful that could be. And I'm standing there with you in that place. And you feel the difference. It's important to note here that empathy is understanding what someone is feeling, not feeling it for them. If someone's feeling lonely, empathy doesn't require us, again, as I said before, to feel lonely. I don't have to feel lonely too, only to reach back into our own experience with loneliness so we can understand and connect from there. Make sense? We're communicating, yeah? So we can fake empathy, okay? But when we do that, it's not healing or connecting, okay? The prerequisite for real empathy is compassion. We can only respond empathetically if we're willing to be present with someone's pain. Empathy is the antidote to shame, okay? It's the heart of connection. Think about that, the antidote to shame. Because people cry, they feel ashamed because they're crying. Empathy is like, here's a box of tissues. There's nothing, feel free. You have permission here to cry. Releasing somebody from the shame of it. You make a mistake. Empathy is, hey, I'm human too. I made mistakes too. Instead of, humiliation. Oh, look what he did. Oh, you did that? How, it was so stupid. Things like that. So again, just going sympathy, a little bit more about sympathy. Rather than being a tool for connection, again, sympathy comes as a form of disconnection. It's removed. It's more like, I feel sorry for you. That must be terrible, but they're keeping a safe distance, okay? Rather than having a little bit of a me too in there with you, okay? Sympathy and pity communicate a little bit of like, not me. I don't want to walk into that room. And sympathy can very much be a shame trigger, rather than something that heals shame. Any questions? Comments?
Maybe we should send empathy or compassion cards instead of sympathy cards when people die.
Yeah.
I've never seen such a thing, but...
It's a nice rephrasing, I think. It's a nice rephrasing. I mean, the sympathy cards come up just as a matter of course of our terminology, right? But it might be nice to have a compassion card sent out, an empathy card. Makes sense. Like that. Absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit more about, or to go into self-compassion. And let me just see if there's anything else I want to, we'll talk about some of this a little bit later. And the other thing about shame, it's a really, so we have something on the Bodhisattva path about shame and consideration. Okay, these are seen as benefits, shame and consideration in this level. I don't want to be confused with the standard shame that we think of. Shame and consideration relate to, shame is where I refrain myself from doing negative behavior because I know how it will affect my mind. Okay, consideration is I refrain from doing negative behavior because I'm concerned that it will disturb others' minds. Like if I'm a nun and I go outside and have a cigarette, and my consideration would be, well, people are going to think that's what a nun's about, or somebody else, a layperson that smokes cigarettes will say, well, I could be a nun then. She smokes cigarettes. Okay. So shame and consideration are different in those contexts in the traditional Tibetan Buddhist path. I just wanted to mention, but shame is much more likely to be the cause of destructive behavior than a cure. Guilt and empathy are the emotions that lead us to question how our actions affect other people. Okay? So now guilt isn't necessarily a positive thing on the Buddhist path. Okay, but they're probably talking more about a guilt that goes into the shame and consideration I was talking about, that keeps you yourself, that sometimes a should comes up. Should I go to that thing, attend that thing? And one of my friends said, if you have a should, then go. Sometimes it keeps a little presence of, I should really be there. Okay, but you don't want to have too much of that in your thing of these obligations when you're not feeling that yourself. So, again, just looking at the level we hold ourselves to be perfect beings is key. Is we can't hold ourselves up. We do hold ourselves up to this level, and when you don't meet that level, you crumble. So there are some people that hold themselves up there. So it's really, in some ways, perfection is an obstacle, in a sense, from really facing your mind and being real and authentic in the world. So much of it, of having this high standard of perfection, totally keeps you from being who you really are. Acknowledging the brokenness, who you really are, to really get in there with people, to really help people like that. So let me talk about self-compassion. I wish we had more time. There's a whole lot of other stuff. And let me, I'm going to read, when I talked about we are all broken, I just want to go into a little bit more about this. How do we practice compassion? Okay. This beginning is acknowledging the brokenness. And these are from this is from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. When we cannot admit our own woundedness, we cannot see the other as a wounded person who has harmed us out of his or her ignorance, pain, or brokenness. Okay? So you don't see them as a wounded person either. Then we create other in the conflict. And one of the things he said, he quotes some things, and one was in the South Africa apartheid tradition. One happened for the Tibetans. Okay? So one of the people that was tortured, I'll see if I don't know if I have the quote here, but I can remember most of it. Here it is. There was a guy being tortured that Archbishop Desmond Tutu met, and he said that in the midst of his torture, he said, this is the thought that the guy had. These are God's children, and they're losing their humanity. We have to help them recover it. So this is his thought about the abuser, Can you imagine having a space of mind like that? Okay, but it allowed him to forgive. Later, when it was over, and they set up the government, they had a Truth and Reconciliation committees and commissions, and you were allowed to do this and sit. It allowed him to forgive the abuser, and it released himself as a hostage from that kind of prison. When you don't forgive somebody, you're only holding yourself prisoner. You're only holding yourself prisoner. It can be so helpful. But imagine the space of mind is we have to help them recover it. So think about when somebody does harm you and you have a lack of compassion. Think of how can I grow the heart open to understand they're just like a wounded dog, just like me in some ways. If I can't acknowledge that in them, how am I going to reach across the divide? Because otherwise we're just going to be separate. Understand? It's really a powerful place. And then compassion, another thing as far as the role of compassion, the magic of compassion. So His Holiness mentioned in one of his books, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, there's a monk that escaped Tibet much later. He was imprisoned for years. He didn't get out in 1959 and spent, I don't know how many years, 20 years in prison, tortured like this. And when he finally got out to Dharamsala, he met with His Holiness. And I think maybe His Holiness knew him when he was in Tibet, and he talked to His Holiness, and His Holiness said to him, did you ever have moments, did you ever feel in real danger in the prison and when it happened? And, did you ever feel in real danger? And then he thought, and he said, there were two times of the whole period. And His Holiness said, what happened? And he said, well, there were 2 times I nearly lost my compassion. That's when he felt like he was in great danger. So not so much great danger of losing his life, but he meant like that. But he said the only times he really felt in danger was when he nearly lost his compassion for his imprisoners, for the communist Chinese. So what kind of space of mind of to realize how much they will suffer based on what they were doing, the place that comes from of torturing someone, the place in their minds it comes from, such a fractured, broken place, recognizing that in myself, I have to have compassion for them. It's the only answer. It's the only answer. Think about it. Think about what the other answers would be. To retaliate back? If you believe in karma, that's not going to work because it's just going to come back around. Like that. It's what got me into it in the first place. Karma says there's potential past propensities, seeds planted by my activities of my body, speech, and mind, create an imprint in the mind and the consciousness that are going to ripen in the future. The positive past seeds ripen in happiness for me. Negative past deeds and activities imprinted, ripen in suffering for me. I retaliate back. I get you back. I say a rude word. I give you the finger when I'm driving in the car. I yell at you. I harm you. I abuse you. I beat you. It's going to come back to you. That's what karma says. Definitely come back to you. Tibetan Buddhist belief. Like that. So, see, what was the last thing I was going to say? Okay, self-compassion. This is really important, and a lot of Buddhists get on the path and think, I don't need to take care of myself. It's all about others, because the premise is to benefit all living beings. All living beings. That includes us. We are a sentient being. All sentient beings. Sentient means with a mind, with a consciousness. So it includes ourselves. If you're not taking care of yourself to some degree, how are you going to be able to take care of others? We've heard this before. His Holiness the Dalai Lama will say, when you get on the path and you start practicing and you realize, I really want to help others, I really want to help others, I need to help others, I want to do it, and you start realizing how limited you are. So it's really hard to help others until I get enlightened. So what I find is a great balance is some internal work and some external work. The internal work is formal meditation practice, study, your own reading, attending classes, reflecting on the classes, what you hear. That's your internal work. I've got to change my mind. And in order to do it, it's a process that's going to take these components. The external work, now I go out in the world and I check. How's it going? We check every moment. You bump up against people. You have a tea break. How's it going? Were you just concerned with, I got to get my own tea? What about the other people that wanted tea? What about somebody who's new at the center? Did I introduce myself to them? Maybe it's their first time at a Buddhist center and they're nervous being here. There's all these people swimming around us. What happens when you go outside? What happens when you go home? Who's there in your home? How do you bump up against people in the grocery store? So eventually you get to a place when you realize, I really need to get myself out of the mess to really be able to help. I need to get enlightened to really be able to help. Then His Holiness says, then be selfish like that. Okay? But you don't stop helping along the way when you can. Okay? So with self-compassion, and this is an important part of compassion, because we feel like, no, it's all directed at others. About yourself. We don't evaluate ourselves according to worldly successes. This is from Thupten Jinpa. We don't compare ourselves with others. How does that work in your life right now? Right? Some people are great, no problem. Some people, there's a lot of So I have some friends, they're on Facebook a lot. They're on social media a lot. I have a Facebook presence, a page. I try to post some things to promote the centers. I'm not on a whole lot. Occasionally. I'm amazed what I found out about. I found out 2 deaths in my family I would not have known about, which was helpful in going to the funeral. I wouldn't have known. We wouldn't have been notified. I found out on Facebook. But basically, I try to limit. And what happens is, this happens to several people I know. Somebody broke up with you. They had a relationship. Somebody broke up with them. There's a divorce or just a newer relationship that you broke up, but they're on Facebook. The other person that got broken up with is obsessive watching them on Facebook. Right? Do you know what that does to your mind? It's so sad. It just creates obsession and anxiety and fear and jealousy and, heart and the comparison. The comparison. Oh, look what they're so happy now. I'm here by myself. So if you're noticing, and I noticed some people said, and we did an exercise in one class of how negative people felt kind of dull after the Facebook cruise they went through, cycling through the thing on their phones at night, and how it didn't make them feel good. Yeah. All that time you could be spending doing something really worthwhile. So check, be careful, be skillful with your technology. Please be skillful. Okay? So, but with self-compassion, we acknowledge our shortcomings and failings. Here we go again, our brokenness. Self-compassion. You acknowledge it. Shortcomings, your failings, again, with patience, with understanding, and with kindness. Is that how you deal with your shortcomings? With patience, understanding, and kindness. How's it going? Right? Something to think about. Okay? Sometimes we're doing very well with it. And I used to be really tight and rigid. As soon as I made a mistake, that's what I obsessed about for a month. Right? I know where it came from. First of all, it came from my own mind, but then I had created some conditions around me that reinforced it. Great. Perfect. So I had to hold myself up to this standard. Could never meet that standard because I'm not perfect. So every time there was a little dent, then that was a whole trip. Rather than me celebrating my good qualities. Okay? You all have good qualities here, and you all do many good things, many good activities. Are you well focused on those? And I don't mean in an egomaniacal way. Are you aware of the good things that you do and the good qualities that you have? How's it going? It's like this. So isn't this interesting? This is an initial exercise with self-compassion. Please try to really wake up with this one, honestly. Okay? Meaning, what I've noticed with people, I've worked at ran two retreat centers. Okay? Larry was there with me at one. He can tell you some great stories about me, right? And all my horror and whatever. Yeah. He'll say, no, there wasn't any, but there was, okay? So it's so funny. When I finished being the director, Larry was still there, right? And what happened is, you're in a center. We had 7 to 9 staff people at any time, full-time staff living there. So you bump up against people. Sometimes I made a decision that people didn't like, right? I didn't do it to harm anybody. I did it because that's what I thought was the best decision at the time. But some people are coming from different places, and they have different roles at the center. They might not understand all that I was involved in to do it the same way I might not understand everything they're involved with their job. So we would bump up against each other. But as soon as I stopped being the director, I became this paragon of virtue. Like the staff members that tussled with me at times started saying she was the best director, and one of them, I said to them, don't you remember the time when we fought about the thing and remember when I asked you to do the thing and you got angry at me? And no, I don't remember any of that, he said. I don't remember any of that. Right? So things get colored, okay? Self-compassion, you view your problems within the larger context of our shared, here it is again, shared human condition. Shared humanity, okay? So self-compassion, unlike self-esteem, it lets us feel more connected with other people, more positively disposed toward them, okay? Finally, self-compassion lets you be honest with yourself, with its attitude of acceptance, okay? Because again, we talked about patience, understanding, and kindness, all require some sort of acceptance. Self-compassion promotes a realistic understanding of our situation. And so what I wanted to mention from the centers, and this relates to your life probably, whether you're at work, with family, and you have a lot of good activities that you do every day, I am sure. I don't know all of you, but I'm sure. And you have many good qualities, and that I know, and I don't need to know you for that. But the fact that you're here, probably have some wish to be a kind, caring person. Anyone who has a wish to just walk in for an hour of a compassion course has some good qualities, okay? But what happens is you do a project, you don't reflect on the good qualities. I mentioned my first 2 minutes in bed. Thank you for this precious life, Amy. And for not only me, but all the beings of my past lives that got me here. I have a lot of appreciation for that and gratitude. Fantastic. And I might have a moment, I reflect very quickly on my good qualities, the good circumstances in my life. There are many. It's unbelievable, my life. And I'm just an average person, okay? So that gives me, precious human rebirth is an antidote to feeling lousy about yourself. It's an antidote to depression and anxiety. Precious human rebirth. You can traditionally meditate on the 18 circumstances that make up a precious human rebirth. Like you're free from being an animal. You're free from being in lower realms. A Buddha existed. A Buddha taught. The teachings are furthered. There's 18 situations traditionally you can meditate on, or just wake up and appreciate that you have relatively clean air to breathe, relatively clean water to drink out of the tap every day, a good infrastructure, loving family and friends, relatively healthy body and mind. Unbelievable circumstances, wonderful circumstances. Do you ever reflect on it? We take it for granted. I've been in countries you cannot drink out of the tap, get severely ill. So I still have a little thing when I turn taps on, of like, little glee. I do. I really am like, Laudo. There was no electricity for years when I did retreat at Laudo. Kerosene lamp. You know what that's like to do retreat with a kerosene lamp in the room? The smell of it, So sometimes I turn a light on and it's just like light, just so easy. My goodness. We're so fortunate, okay? So what happens when you're working, you didn't reflect on the good things. You don't have the balance. You didn't give airtime to the good stuff about your life and yourself. And then your boss says, there's a little problem with this project. I kind of wanted this done this way. Oh, you didn't clean over there. How come how come you left at this time? Why didn't you leave late? And immediately we obsess about that. There's a pattern in our mind to focus on the negative. It comes from low self-esteem. We just have a pattern to focus on the negative, and we give all this airtime to the negative. I did experiments at centers with staff people when I would directly compliment them. This was a great thing. I love this flyer. Thank you. Wonderful. Right? They wouldn't make eye contact with me. Why can't you acknowledge? Okay? So that's another device of the ego. Low self-worth. That's another device of the ego. We think it's about being an egomaniac. The same thing. It's the same device of the ego to think you're less than worthy. So I noticed this where people couldn't make eye contact. I'd have to be like, hello, hello. Really great job. Are you hearing me? Do you hear what I'm saying? Well, and they go, yeah, well. So they didn't really hear. And as soon as I said, oh, I thought you were going to fix the table before the group came. Oh, it goes right into I'm not good enough. That's all they hear. And the next month, that's all they obsess about. I didn't fix the table. That's all she focused on. I didn't fix the table. Didn't you hear what I said about the flyer? What, you never say anything good to me. It's not true. You're not used to giving the equal airtime. You need to rebalance. Tibetan Buddhism is about having a balanced, open, spacious mind. You deserve it. You deserve it. You're good people. So check up when suddenly I'm obsessing about the negative thing. Somebody poked me. Somebody said something offhand, right? Go home and analyze. Is it true? You do need to take responsibility. Is it true? But is that the only truth? No, that's right. Yesterday they said this really positive thing about me. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm good. I just messed up a little. I was a little late on this, but that's okay. I'm okay. I'm going to be better next time with this one. But it doesn't ruin my entire day or month. But some people, that's it. They're off in the cycle. They fell into the trench, the ruminating, I'm worthless, I'm no good. It's all they said. I didn't clean the room right. It's all they hear. It's not the truth. It's not the whole truth. So please rebalance. Okay, so let's leave it for here. And we'll continue this. And we're going to take a lunch break. Any questions I want to just say of anything? Questions, comments? Okay. I see everyone's very quiet over on this side of the hill. Okay. We're going to talk more about this. We're going to take a lunch break. I would like to offer lunch if we could turn to our gold prayer books to page 207. It's very helpful before we dive in to offer the food. So let's think about, for a moment, all the beings on the planet who are hungry right now, starving. Could we imagine? We have such grace to have wonderful food provided by the center, I believe. Is that right? So kind. Okay, but that's fine. No, but that's very cheap. That's very nice. Well, what's nice is it's here. It's easy. I know centers, you go out and you get lost, and the next thing you're, in the dollar store buying, potato mashers. Okay, you don't need that. It's like, we're here. We're going to keep ourselves a little contained. You can go out for a walk if you want, but it's great that they provide it, make it easy. Think about all the people starving and hungry. What if we can imagine offering this food to them? And just imagine that it completely alleviates their suffering, bringing them to ultimate happiness. For all the beings who may have died or were harmed as a result of the food coming to us, may they take a good rebirth to become enlightened, to benefit all. May they be healed instantly. Imagine offering the food to all the holy beings represented in the images of in this room, and it brings great bliss to their holy minds. Food that is completely empty in nature. May the food nourish us so we can continue our afternoon with good health, energy, to understand more about emptiness that will benefit our hearts and minds to quickly get enlightened to benefit others. So for the purpose of benefiting all living beings, we will practice the yoga of eating lunch. And we will bless the food with the 3 syllables you see, Om, Ah, Hung. You can visualize white, red, and blue nectar rays coming from, respectively, the forehead, throat, and heart of all the holy images in this room, as we recite Om Ah Hung 3 times. And those light and nectar rays are going into the food. Om Ah Hung, Om Ah Hung, Om Ah Hung. When it says guru here, I'd like to chant this in the phonetics. Guru is, in a sense, the absolute guru. Guru means spiritual teacher, but the absolute guru is, in a sense, the highest state of your consciousness, fully realized. In a sense, the wisdom from which everything comes that is manifest in that state. O Lama Sangye Lama Jodejin Lama Gedunte Kungi Jebo Lama Te Lama Namla Chiparbu. Please enjoy. And we are going to start back around 2 o'clock.